Okay, you're officially being recorded for this mini workshop. Al wants to call them small bites. Is that what he's calling them? Yeah, the small bites workshop series. It's one of the Moodle mini workshops, a little 30-minute workshop. I've got a handful of tips for you that just things that I thought up and Al and I have talked about, things that I've learned from working with other faculty about small things that you can do to try to increase the likelihood that your students right here at the end of the semester will be successful. So I am just wondering what the recording is going to look like. Let's go like this instead. Okay, so I'm grateful that you all are here. I'm going to go ahead. I have a slideshow. I'll just share that a little bit. If you have questions, it's a really tiny group, just the three of you, the four of us together. If you have questions or comments as we go, feel free to ask them. I will, if I think I'm going to cover it in another slide, I might just say, hang on, we're going to probably get to that. And at the end, we might have time for just a couple of things. And if you have tips that I didn't cover that you think are really useful, please, include those too. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Let me configure my windows really quickly, and then I'm going to share my screen. Hold on. Y'all don't need to see my email. I don't even want to see my email. Okay, let's try again. All right, so hopefully you all can see my slide presentation. I'm going to share it in a moment. All right. Does that look okay to you guys?
Looks great.
Perfect. Okay, yeah, this is the slide I was really proud of, just so you all know. I call this turning the train. It's hurtling really quickly toward end of term, but there are some things you can still do. Hopefully, we're getting a little close to the end, but near the end, there's still enough time to turn that train. And here are some ways to do it. Tip number one, be sure your grading is up to date. It might sound obvious, but we're all underwater at this time of the term too. And if there are some things that maybe you have in your class, like auto-graded quizzes in Moodle, that are not going to give students a 0 unless you go in and give a 0 if they didn't take the quiz. The way most people have their Moodle gradebook set up, if an item hasn't been graded, then it doesn't count against the student. And that normally works really well. But at the end of term, if students missed some quizzes, let's say, and they kind of lost track of them and you haven't put in 0s for them, they will think they have a better grade than they do. So it's a really good idea to update your grading as much as you can, a little bit before finals, right? Any late work that you have already given students permission to turn in and maybe they never got around to it, be a good idea to tidy that up. And any assignments maybe that have flexible due dates, kind of check in with those things too, because students can easily lose track of things and not realize that their grade is worse if those things are 0s than they think it is. So that's a really helpful thing. And it means a little time for you to schedule, but it can really help students to really know what truly is my grade as of now. Tip number 2 is you can do a late term check-in and reflection activity. I love doing this activity with my students, and the way I work it, and the other faculty I know who use this technique, you just have it be something that will go toward their attendance, participation, engagement category of grade if you use a weighted grade book. It counts toward being engaged with your learning or participation and attendance. It can kind of go in that category. And generally what I do is have them ask students to address some of these questions or all of these questions. Really, so what is your grade in the course? That's a good question to ask them, and that's really helpful. Is that where you want to be in this course? If not, and maybe it is, they're like, I'm sitting on a C and I'm perfectly happy. Or they might think, I need to have an A in this class and I'm on a C and I'm unhappy. So it's good for them to sort of just check in with that. Do they understand why they have the grade they have? So trying to account for, are you missing assignments? And then there's a conversation that can be had. Well, let's make those up and you can get partial credit. Did they just get below target scores on exams? And that's helpful so that they know where to direct their energy for the remaining activities and assignments and exams in the class. Asking them to address each of these questions in a small reflection is really important. So if they're not on track, what do they need to take to course correct? So they may not know this and they might need help from you, but if they can start to write down a plan of action, research shows that if you make a plan and you write it down and you tell somebody that plan, you're much more likely to actually do it. And then the last question is, what support might they need to be successful? Just asking them, even if they don't know, getting them to think about that question can be the first step toward getting that kind of help. So this is probably, of all the tips I'm going to recommend, I think this one is probably the most powerful. It is another assignment that you have to grade, but you can grade it by they did it and they answered all the questions, full credit kind of thing, or received, not received kind of thing. And so it's one of those where the student has to do a lot of reflection and thinking, and you have to do very little. And I love those kinds of assignments because it helps the student a lot without so much outlay on your part. So tip number 3, and you probably already do some of these things. So, please don't be offended if I suggest something you're like, yes, of course, I always do that. I just want to put everything in one pile in case there's something that we just didn't think of or you forgot this semester. Just to sort of remind them of what's left in the class, what's remaining, not just what's coming up next week, but what is the balance of work, assignments, assessments left in the class, projects, and asking them, this is actually another little activity that I often have them do, ask them to answer this question: how will you make time to prepare for and complete the tasks that are remaining? Because you're going to have a lot of competition for your time. What challenges do they anticipate getting this done for your class? That's a very useful question. And often it really prompts some deep thinking on students and some realizations that they really aren't set up to complete this successfully unless they make some changes to what they had planned to be doing or how they've been spending their time. Just asking them what resources they might need. They actually might need to go to the tutoring center, or they maybe need to come to your office hours in order to complete these remaining tasks. And they maybe haven't realized that yet. But asking them to think about it ahead of time is really beneficial usually. You can use this as a quick writing exercise at the beginning or the end of a class while you're taking roll or while you're wrapping up. I love to have them debrief this with a partner because they get really good ideas from each other. They can sort of norm against whether or not other people are kind of in the same boat as them. Maybe they'll find a partner to study with or to try to have an accountability partner with. But it's really useful for them to say out loud what the problem is. Again, it's really tricky for all humans to say a problem and be in an environment where you don't actually come up with a solution, partly because these questions prompt them to get to that. So this is a really wonderful exercise, and it doesn't even have to be graded. It's something you can just do in class, or you could do it as a discussion board if you want, but they might be just really sick of discussion boards, in which case you could just ask them to really quickly talk about this and write about it. I use this one frequently, not just at the end of term, but sometimes as they're preparing for a large project. This is one that I don't usually do, but I think is really helpful when I remember to do it, is near this time of term to just review and clarify what is the grading scheme in this class. Reminding them, they forget this, I think, especially undergrads, that different assignments contribute to the final grade in really different ways. They might be really obsessed and spending tons of time on something that isn't maybe contributing in such a large way to their final grade. And if they can help to be reminded about how different assignments and tasks contribute to the final grade, they can be more strategic about how to invest their energy and time, especially if they're behind. And if maybe they've fallen behind on things like homework or other kinds of low stakes assignments, discussion boards maybe, and that would be a huge outlay of time at this point in the term, and it wouldn't count very much for their grade. It would be better for them to focus their energies maybe on preparing for the exam that's worth a whole lot more. Students often lose sight of that weighting relative to each other, and then they can mismanage their time. So this can be a really generous way to help them just be strategic. And it also can help them develop a skill about being strategic, especially for our undergrad students. We have 6 tips and we're at number 4. So let's go to the end, and then we can talk about different ones and brainstorm, and I can offer a little more description and details about them as we go. So tip number 5, and I have to give Al credit for reminding me about this one, is building in some support for the higher stakes end of term assessments, projects, exams, review sessions. Just offering some if you don't already could be really helpful. If you have a TA, that could be helpful. If you facilitate peer study group sessions, and this can look a lot of ways, but it might be as simple as passing around a piece of paper or making a Google Doc where you invite students to sign up if you're interested in a study session, or you just group them. This may not be such a big deal with grad students, but with undergrads, it's often a big social risk for them to reach out to their classmates and say, hey, would you like to study with me? That can be a really big social risk and can be misinterpreted. So if you as the teacher say, you know what, I'm going to prompt you, you're going to be in study groups. You can choose to study together or not, but let's form our own, or think of ways that work really well for your classroom community to just help them to make a study group and maybe plan some sessions, or get them an opportunity to plan some sessions. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in the last tip. But they often need help with that at the undergrad level. You can take some steps to alleviate their anxiety as they're heading toward those high stakes projects and assessments, just by discussing the format of the exam, letting them see exactly what kinds of things will they encounter, say example on an exam, how many points, how much that weighting. Of these multiple choice, there's a lot of them, but they don't count nearly as much as this big writing one at the end. And so maybe you want to start with the big one, something like that. Anytime, and there's quite a bit of research about this, that you can give them example questions to practice with, that's really, really helpful, because then when they encounter that prompt, even if it's a new prompt, if it's the same format, they will have rehearsed how to engage with that task. And that can be really helpful for them to be successful. And again, you probably do some or all of these things, but we're putting them all in one slideshow for you. The last tip is to remind students that we have a tutoring center, the Center for Learning and Student Success, and that they can and should take advantage of that free resource. They might have forgotten, or they might think, I am not failing the class, so I don't need to go to the tutoring center. But this is just another opportunity to remind them that that's there, and it could be really beneficial for them. And all of these little interventions can help them be supported as they're approaching those higher stakes exams and projects. And the last tip I have for you guys is kind of a big one. You can see why there's a lot of text on this page. But rethinking extra credit inevitably at this part of the semester, if you don't already have extra credit built into your class, you're going to have a student ask for extra credit very often. And even if you do, they might ask for more extra credit or different extra credit. And this is a huge time suck on teachers. It's a lot of time and trouble sometimes to think of extra credit. I have faculty tell me this all the time. So rather than you going through a lot of thinking at the end of the term to try to come up with some extra credit project, it might be helpful to rethink extra credit entirely. And instead of thinking of it as extra credit, which is all about the points, it can think about it as extra learning, an opportunity to make progress on achieving those student learning outcomes, especially if they are student learning outcomes where the students have underperformed. They have a chance to review and practice those skills and knowledge, especially in areas where maybe they underperformed because they didn't do well on an assessment or a project. So letting them try again to rehearse or review that content is much better than just some kind of thing you can think up to get some extra points to pass the class. That doesn't mean they can't get extra points, and that might help them pass the class, but it actually gets to the root of it, which is we're trying to get some learning to happen. Some other examples, and the last bullets are really just examples of most of the last bullets are examples of things that you might do for extra learning. Maybe they can revise an essay or some other written assessment for a higher score. So they just try again. That can be useful, or they get points toward the original. Then they're trying again instead of just making up something brand new. And you don't have to invent something brand new. You've already built that assignment. Having them do some error analysis and reflection on an exam that they took and didn't do as well on as they would have liked, even if they passed it. Still having them look at it and say, what did you miss? Why did you miss that? What did you do to prepare, and where did it fall through for you, and what might you do differently? Can really be a very helpful metacognitive exercise for them, and then they can get some points for having done that work. You might have them create a study guide for an exam, and it doesn't even have to be an upcoming exam. It might be one that they had a low score on before. And so when they prepare that study guide, essentially they'll be filling in the holes of the things that they didn't learn the first time. And that's another opportunity for new learning or relearning. And then they can share that with others perhaps, or they just create it for you. Those are options. You can have them have a study session, but they turn in a reflection on that study session. Who went and what did you get? How did it go? Describe the session? Give me a timeline. Did it help you feel more prepared? So you can put a word limit on that and maybe give a little bit more structure to what you would want. But what is implicit in this is that they have to have had a study session, which we know will help them be successful on the remaining assessments. And they are going to reflect on that sort of study strategies, interpersonal strategies for trying to, interpersonal support for learning and things like that, all which is really helpful. Of course, you could also just have them do an extra homework set, which is really that review and practice for skills and knowledge. And it might be an extra homework set from an area or a chapter or part of the content where they underperformed. Would be better than just making one up. And then my last piece of advice, which is what I always do, and maybe it's because I'm a lazy teacher. I don't think so. I ask them to propose to me an extra credit activity. If there's a student who came to me with a legitimate request for extra credit, actually, I let them all give me their proposal if they want to. I have them propose that extra credit activity or assignment. What will you do? Why that assignment? So they have to write up this whole proposal, which is really wonderful metacognition. And then they have to do the thing. And then they have to, often I have them include what would the criteria be for successful sample of this extra credit. So they do all the work and they learn a ton, and it's easy for me. And then I think that that's a worthwhile kind of extra credit, the kind that takes work off of me and has them do extra work in the areas where they really need it to go. So those are my tips. I'm going to stop sharing so we can chat about them, but I'm happy to pop back into any of these slides if you guys want and we want to talk about them. So you guys have extra ideas that I didn't cover? Questions about the ones I did cover? Yeah, Teresa, go ahead.
I'm wondering how you roll these out, or do you wait for the student to kind of approach you, or how do you take the temperature of the room, I guess? And speaking of the virtual room.
For interventions in general, or the extra credit / extra learning?
Well, yes, both. I would say for the need to address some of these. Are you waiting for the student to, are you broadcasting these to the class? Certainly the poll would be in a appropriate sync session. But otherwise, what strategies do you have if you just have that, and I'm sure I'm not alone in that feeling at this time of the semester that everybody's just sagging, dropping off, like needing to infuse something into the course at this stage?
I think that most of those tips are things I would probably try to do anyway, regardless of the temperature, right? Especially update your grades and then have some sort of a prompt or an activity. You're dealing with graduate students, is that right, Teresa?
Yes.
So might work a little bit differently. You probably certainly have a different sort of responsibility for your own learning kind of thing happening with graduate students. But so maybe asking them to tell you what their grade is and are they at the right place in the course might not go over as well with grad students, but you can still prompt them, remind them, hey, I've updated the grades. So you probably want to take a look at where you are, because now is the time to talk to me about things that don't look right, not after the course is done. We can't do anything really then, it's too late. So I actually say we still have time to turn the train. So please check your grades. And they are updated. So you can even, with grad students, you can wrap it around just an announcement that the grade book is up to date. Just wanted to let you know the grade book's up to date. So you might want to check your grade and make sure you're where you want to be in this class. And then that might cascade into some of the other things that you might need to do with your grad students, which might be, okay, you need to pass this class to go on, and you're not where you're going to need to be. And then maybe you already have a policy in your department, or you maybe already have a policy in your class for what you can do to remediate a score that's not high enough for them to go on. But so for sure, some way asking them to look at their grades and take account of what they've done and haven't done, in case if you already know that there's some missing assignments or some quizzes that are missing, and you know then that students actually are sitting on a different grade than they think they are, that's a place where there's a gap you all can fall in, and it's the pit of despair in there. So it's definitely a time to try to make some sort of an intervention now, when there's still enough time for you can say, yeah, okay, go ahead and get that work to me. They maybe don't realize that there's missing work. I think that's often the case. They don't even realize they didn't do it. Sometimes they do, but sometimes they're like, oh my gosh, I blew that quiz and I didn't even realize I forgot to do that. So I also think going over the course, your grade scheme, if you have one that's a weighted scheme where homework, they have a lot of little homework practice, but it isn't really going to kill them if they've missed a couple of those, but they really should be focusing on trying to be ready for those big, or if there's a big thing they missed and they need to try to remediate that with you one-on-one or something. Just reminding them, because it can all feel like all the work I have to do. This little homework assignment can feel as important as preparing for the exam for students, especially younger students. But I think for all of us, and helping them to have that sort of depth perception about the relative weight of those classes, of the assignments and tasks that they have to do, if they're in a place where they have to make decisions. And this time of semester, they're getting there usually.
It's a bad time to rely on their executive functioning skills.
And right now, I mean, I could talk about trauma-informed pedagogy. If any of y'all been at my sessions, that's gone for a lot of people. And even for those people who are not actively processing trauma, it's not back. It's not back to what it was pre-pandemic. Not for any of us, from what I'm reading. So anything we can do to still support executive function, I think, is great. And even in normal times, graduate students are often working individuals. They have families, they have responsibilities. So their executive function has so much weight on it anyway. Why wouldn't we do a little small something to help them out? I think it's low output for us and high payoff for them. It's just more humane, I think. Chris, do you have anything that you are thinking?
I just have one question, and I guess my question is about best practice with regard to extra credit or extra learning. I guess it's my assumption that if it's offered to all students and not based on students that come forward and ask. So that's, I think, been the approach that we've taken, especially we're changing our curriculum. And so we're moving from a pass, no pass across all our courses to letter graded again. And so now students are really caring about their letter grade versus just whether they're passing the class or not. So I guess I just wanted to put that out there to see what anybody's thoughts are about that.
Yeah, and look, go ahead,
That
Ramona.
was my question too. And I was also wondering about fairness, and because you said you asked students to propose some extra credit, but I take it that that's a very individual approach, and that doesn't seem like it would be fair, because some students have the opportunity and some students don't, or some students get to do X and other students don't get to do X and do Y or whatever. So that sounds like it's tricky.
Yeah, well, it is a little bit tricky, but generally I offer that to the whole class. If you want extra credit, you can, but you need to propose it to me, and I make it actually quite challenging, because I would rather they just do the work that I assigned them in class, because that was designed to help you reach the learning outcomes. And so I might be more inclined to offer to everyone, okay, it looks like some folks didn't quite get to this part. I'm going to give everybody, an extension on this, or, my window of endless generosity, I call it one time, when I was like, if you have outstanding work, you can turn it in by now for, 50% credit, but this offer ends as of whatever, because I'm not going to be like the last day after class before finals are due. I'm not going to be sifting through 100 homework assignments that people turned in all across the whole Moodle gradebook. So I sort of give them a window, and I guess that's true. I should be more clear. The offer is offered to everyone. If there's an extra credit offer, it's worth the same number of points, and everyone has an opportunity to do it. However, most students do not take me up on that opportunity because it's a ton of work to imagine a new project and to complete it, give me the proposal, get my sign off, and complete it. So that kind of a large, more sort of a major extra credit thing almost never is accepted from students. Now, the revising for a higher grade is really, certainly if it's anything related to writing, is absolutely supported in all the literature, writing in the disciplines, writing across the curriculum discipline or literature. And that is an offer to everyone. But I make that not easy. They have to rewrite it and they have to annotate it and they have to tell me what they changed and why it's better. So I don't have a lot of work. They didn't just go in and, change my track changes and give it back to me. That's nonsense. They have to go through and give me a letter telling me what they changed and why it's better. So it really makes them think hard about what changes they're making and why. And that's really worth points to me. I'm very happy to give credit points for that because that's a ton of work that they're doing and it supports their learning. So those kinds of, if you're going to do extra credit that you hadn't already planned in the course, those are some places where you can look at it and say, look, it's true. This student isn't going to pass if they don't do this. I can't just offer it to one. Let me let everybody do it, but let's make it challenging, challenging enough that it's not a throwaway thing, because my time is not throwaway. Ramon, I saw you unmute. You want to say something?
No, I'm good. I'm good.
Are you sure?
You addressed it mostly.
Okay. So anything else that you guys think of, maybe something you do that we didn't cover here that you would share as a piece of advice for folks? Okay, well, we're technically at time, so I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording as of now.